Wheel of Genre, the show for readers who wanted a vampire novel without any of the fun parts.
That's what I was thinking the whole time.
Each month we spin the wheel and land on a new genre or topic, exploring it through 4 or 5 stories, including this one, Poul Anderson's The Boat of a Million Years. I'm Zach, and this week I'm really interested in narrative craft and how to do narrative craft when when time is not a constraint for you.
Wow, I love your... That's great. Okay, I'm Bob. I'm interested in last time. So in our immortality journey, Zach, where we are now immortal, we're never gonna die. Rock on. We read Book of Skulls, which I thought was fantastic. One of the best books I've read in a while. Now we can talk about whether we liked Boat of a Million Years. But I think what's really interesting to me is the difference in the pursuit of immortality. In that book, it was like these characters needed immortality as much as they needed life, as much as they needed death. I think this is a completely different story altogether, where we're looking at what does history mean for a person who can contain that history. When you're that old, 1,000 years old, 1,500 years old, what is that experience like? Poul Anderson, Zach, I think this is our third attempt at a Poul Anderson book. It's a little rocky, but...
Second published attempt. We did have one. I think the first book we ever did not finish was by Poul Anderson.
That was a rough ride, but we can go back to it maybe. But here we go. Poul Anderson is interesting. He published, like lots of these science fiction authors at this time, over 100 novels and short stories. I'm trying to find exactly how many novels, and it's difficult to really find that out besides counting it, which I'm too lazy to do. But he won the Hugo 7 times. 7 times. Not just nominated, he won it. And he won the Nebula 3 times, and he was nominated for tons of other awards. He started a bunch of foundations, which sounded quite interesting. He was the founder of Society for Creative Anachronism, SCA, in 1966, and the Swordsmen and Sorcerers Guild of America, SAGA, also around the same time. But that's pretty much all I know about him, and then he writes books. Go, Paul.
I come at him from the opposite way, which is I spent more time exploring what the contemporary reception of Poul Anderson is. Oh. And it's actually really shocking to me how this is a person who I cannot find a warm review. I can't find anyone who's reading Poul Anderson today and absolutely loving the experience of doing so. Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting to see, this is someone who is included in the infamous Dangerous Visions anthology, which we've recorded episodes on every single story of that. And also someone who, like you said, has published dozens and dozens, if not possibly hundreds of times in his career, winning all these awards. So presumably at the time of writing, someone loved Poul Anderson, but now I don't hear his name among the list of people who are looked back upon fondly from this era. So it raises all of these questions for me about what changed. Has the reader moved on? Has expectations for an SF novel moved on? Questions I probably won't be able to answer without really reading more Poul Anderson. I'm not committing to that yet, but it is an open question as we encounter him in my mind.
It sounds like a breakup, Zach. It's not you, it's me. I'm a contemporary reader. I just can't.
My brain is rotted by TikTok and Hollywood cinema. I'm sorry, Paul.
Sorry, Paul. So I want to give a very generous reading to this. Yes, I also was finding lots of negativity about Poul Anderson, but I think he probably was quite beloved when he was publishing. And I think this book is actually full of really, really, really interesting ideas. But I think he is under the based God spell of just, I'm going to put out stuff constantly, not look back and just keep going. And I say more power to him. It's hard to read, but it's chock full of really interesting ideas that we can pick apart and talk about now. So I think, although we might not like his style, we can like his takes on immortality. Now, I think completely different book, as I already said, to Book of Skulls, but I think this is an interesting... I don't think the I'm living forever is that interesting in this book, but what it means for these characters as historical figures who are going through, thousands and thousands of years. That is what I'm finding most interesting. Do you feel like there's any novel take on immortality in this?
Yeah, there were a couple ideas that really gave me pause, gave me food for thought. But all of them related to the idea of the individual's relationship, the immortal individual's relationship to an ever-changing society. Now, there was a lot of different takes on this, many of which were repeated often, which was, the idea that they'd have to pack up and move or, restart their life under a new name, a new identity. That, any novelty that had wore through, I think, by like the third time that story was retold. But some of the ideas that stuck with me were the ideas that their belief systems, which they have kind of accumulated over time, eventually become outdated, or dare I say, even a handicap in an evolving world. Now, it's easier to see that because the entire end of the novel hangs on that, but you can also see that in terms of, some of the immortals, one of which was born in Phoenicia, for example. He still carries this kind of, I guess we could just say, Phoenician outlook through everything he does, which, mercantile, always moving. For him, that seems to work out just fine and just okay. But for others, you see them pick on these other beliefs, for example. Like, I think one of the characters becomes a slave owner and white supremacist at one point. And you can kind of see how, like, as these different sedimentary layers of all of these different lives that they've lived kind of stack up and up on top of their kind of basic core personality, they become unwieldy. It weighs down on them, and they can no longer really function in the way that they need to in order to continue thriving in these new worlds.
I got a question for you, Zach, I want to come back to, and I want to talk about the plot a little bit, but one question that the characters ask themselves when they get onto this big spaceship, they say, have we gone outside of humanity? Are we no longer human now that we're immortal? And I think that's a big question here. These immortal people, again, it's kind of like the chrysalids where we have all these people. They're just suddenly aware, because they're not dying, that they are immortal. Hundreds of years go by. These people are all on different continents. They start running into other people, and it's kind of like a weird code that they have with each other. Like, they start to suspect someone. Some put out different ads to say, we're, as a scientist, we are looking for people who seem to live for a very long time, hoping they'll run into someone. So as these people start getting, becoming more and more aware, they start to form this little group. As they form this group, we go further and further into the future. It becomes time for them to leave the Earth. They volunteer. Look, we have not fit in with the rest of humanity for a long time. We've had to keep these secrets for a long time. Now we're going to get on this spaceship, traveling close to the speed of light, going to a new planet. And then it's, a continuation of how these people cope. And as you said, Zach, they have these things, cultural things that are maybe out of date, that are holding them back from integrating into this new immortal species of humans, because humans, besides them, all become immortal. But they are wondering, are we no longer participating in humanity? Are we non-human now? Do you think these immortals are no longer human? Do you think immortality cuts you off from humanity?
Well, I would actually reframe it in a different way, because
Sure.
it cuts them off from the thrust of humanity. But from what I'm gathering about this book, the thrust of humanity is to become inhuman. And they have a really good word here, which is postbiotic. They kind of speculate at the end that, circling around what they call the monstrosities at the center of our universe, the black holes and stuff, aren't other alien species, but actually the machines left over from these alien species that have been sent out to explore the universe. The civilizations and the life forms have given rise to a kind of postbiotic life form that just exists. I guess you could say, think of it as like humanity being a cocoon, and then the wasp goes and flies away, something like that. So I get the sense that being immortal, not only, it prevents them from fully adapting to the modern realities, but it also prevents them from integrating into a kind of post-human life. And you can really, really see that friction in those chapters leading up to before they leave, where, people are hooked up into these, virtual reality machines or alternate reality machines. They're getting surgeries to try out new identities, new genders, new sexes. They're growing different parts of their body and manipulating DNA to become, I want to try life as part animal. There's a sense in which as humanity becomes more and more tech oriented, it is willing to leave behind the essence of humanity, is what Anderson seems to be saying. But for these immortals who've seen it all, they retain that spark or that droplet or whatever, however you want to conceptualize the essence of humanity. They aren't letting it go.
They even call themselves at one point, they say, maybe we are the last children because they're the only ones who were born before this big change. I was really skeptical of the idea, however, that they can still hold on to these memories. I know that these immortals are born with special, healing properties. So if they get injured in a way, it will slowly repair. If they get their ears pierced, it will that happens to anybody. Never mind. They will...
not me.
Not you. It's still there.
Don't stretch your ears, kids.
PSA. But I was skeptical of the memory because if you're around for 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 years, as some of these characters are, how would you not completely become a new person? I mean, you would lose your accent, you would lose most of your memories from a culture. You would become a completely different person every 300 or 400 years. I just don't believe they would remember that. I know they have these healing properties, so they do, but I was skeptical of this whole idea as well, and they're skeptical of it too, but this idea of a human as a kind of zenith point. You are around so long, you take up so much wisdom, and this is kind of one thing that they're hoping for before they're kind of jaded and they get onto the ship. Some of these characters have become really wise people, and so they become almost cult leaders or like heads of religions. These people come and pray to them because they're so old and so wise. So that fantasy of a human being a zenith point where you've lived so much history, you have all the answers to history, starts to fade away. So for example, there's the one character who's from China and another immortal comes to see him. And this immortal is not really repairing as the others do, or at least has memory problems, because when the other immortal asks, like, how long have you been doing this grift? He's like, for a while. It's been centuries. And he has let everyone know that he is immortal, so people come and pray to him, and it somehow gives this society stability. But the conversation is very awkward because this guy has completely forgotten over the last few centuries who he is, what he's doing, and what's going on at all.
I thought that Anderson did something interesting with the form, and I'm sure he did it out of necessity, but the very elliptical nature of each chapter, like we don't get the full day-to-day lived experience of each immortal. We get just these brief snippets of, I guess I would really just say core memories, like days that are extremely important to them. And you get this, you get these things where like two immortals meet each other on an off chance, I guess we could say one night stand, though that's probably not the best emotional characterization of what happened. But, but then 1,000 years later, they run into each other again and they don't recognize each other. And if they had picture perfect memory, they would, but because there is out of necessity gaps to their memory, they have to basically remind each other who they are. And that kind of experience seems to be mirrored in the structure of the book, probably out of necessity, but it is a small correspondence there.
This is something I thought would have been even better explored if you went further in the book, because think about, you have these core memories, these things that were formative for you. But if you're alive, again, for, 1,000 years, 2,000 years, what continues to be formative for you? If we think about, especially Freudian psychology or any psychology, you have these different experiences, especially in childhood, which might form you or form parts of you for a long time. But if you're alive 2,000 years, does that even stay with you? Or do you completely evolve into something different?
And this was one of those weird, I don't want to say nitpicks I had with the book, but people's core identities seem to crystallize at certain moments but I mean, I can't blame him for this, and it's not really even an issue, but it was kind of like who each person was at their very core seemed to be crystallized around a very certain moment. And it was always out of step with the present, but it felt like at a certain point they kind of just became the person from this time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they represent that whole time.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
was wondering.
it's a cool storytelling experiment to be like, we have a person from this time interacting with a person from that time, interacting from a person with that time, having these different, I guess you could say, caricatures of different time periods interacting with each other is a cool idea. But, part of the thing that I feel like could have been more accurately captured or more accurately, not accurately, accurate isn't the right word, but more interestingly explored is the idea that after a certain point, you have to just become something totally unique, a true one of a kind. You know what I mean?
This was something I thought was very interesting too. You have these crystallized people, or maybe they become unique, one of a kind. But I think in their engagements with each other as they're trying to find out, it felt very much like high school, almost like cliques, because there's all of this kind of tribal in-group stuff of trying to figure out, like, what is the right code language? How do I play this? So there's these conversations of, are you one of us? How do you prove you're one of us? Are you just pretending to be immortal? Are you pretending to be a well-read person like Bob and Zach? Just kidding. But there, I thought that was very interesting, where there's the experiment of these people who are almost crystallized, who are changing their habits in ways, but then to get into this in-group, they have to prove something else by talking about different experiences and because you could make a lot of stuff up, but they have to somehow, with those core memories, with a few stories, prove that they are one of this group. And sometimes it doesn't work, and they have to wait another few decades and go in and check in with that person.
I mean, that was fun. It was like getting the team together kind of an experience. And I agree that some of the best moments of this book were when these characters finally meet each other and have to negotiate with each other or use coded language, or, sometimes they betray each other. That was the fun parts of the book for me. But I want to ask you, because this book's pacing, well, its scope is crazy, but its pacing is really interesting, because what we have is essentially a historical fiction novel for the first 75% of the book. And then I guess I would say the next 15% of the book is a kind of like generational ship novel, but there's only one generation. And then the final 10% of the book is their life on an alien planet meeting a different species. So I had texted you at some point and I said, man, this would be a way better book if it started 75% of the way through. Yeah. I did take that back in my mind, though. I do think that actually you need the entire journey of their time on Earth in order to make the spaceship and the alien species meaningful. But I just want to ask you, like, what do you think of the pacing? What do you think of the ratios we have going on here? How would you adjust it if you could?
For the love of God, just give me a Rocky montage. That's all I want. I don't want 75%. Like, we're talking like this thick of nothing, of just these characters doing nothing. Cut it. But I feel like this book had lots of good ideas, and maybe Poul Anderson had many good ideas. I feel like it's something that someone took to a workshop, and then someone suggested, wow, I would really love more character development. And then Poul Anderson's like, oh, do you want more character development? And then wrote for like 100 hours just constantly about these characters, and then no one ever told him to cut anything, and then they published it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I saw a video of someone's bookshelf tour of their Poul Anderson books, and this book, I was like, oh, what's that really thick one on the shelf? And sure enough, it was this book, twice the size of all of his other books, sticking out on the shelf. But yeah, I like what you're talking about, how the density of ideas, I think you mentioned at one point in there, because it feels like you have one idea for the first 75% of the book. What if? What would it look like if, and that is explored to such a mind-numbing depth And I was perfectly willing to accept that we were doing a book that was a one idea book that wanted to really explore it. But then as soon as they reveal their existence, suddenly we're at a book which is throwing ideas at us at a mile a minute. Like my jaw dropped because I was like, suddenly I'm taking notes, I'm underlining things. I'm like, oh yeah, that's really interesting. Or, oh, that's an idea that I hear people repeat today, like, so I don't understand what happened there or how that happened, or just like, it's such an interesting reading experience.
He needed an editor. What do you think of all their swinging? There seems to be a lot of sexy 70s stuff going on in this generational ship. I couldn't really see any other idea explored except for swingers.
Yeah. I'm a prudish 2025 2025 reader. But they pretty much just left me cold, and they didn't make me feel, they didn't get me grooving, baby. They didn't make me feel like it's the 70s. Yeah. It just was kind of like, all right,
put the pants back on. Yeah. Jinkies, Zach. I agree. Yeah. I was not super into that. What in your opinion, what do you think is the best idea in this book?
That a post-scarcity world is a decadent world. And if you remove the ability to have children and couple that with a post-scarcity world, you have absolutely nothing to live for but consumption. That was a really interesting idea.
It just becomes Wall-E.
Yeah. What about you? What did you like?
I think a really important idea in this too, as we are moving closer to technologies, which very well could make us live forever, at least our consciousness live forever. Similar, it becomes decadent, but also it's a fantasy that we've had that we will have some sort of zenith point, coming to some sort of perfection. It's the same idea of why we learn history. We learn history so we won't repeat it. And of course, that is never true. We just keep doing terrible things. I think there's a fantasy that we have as humans, not just to seek immortality to avoid death, but to seek immortality to have that kind of constant attachment to history and to see it progress to some kind of endpoint where everything is peaceful. But I think that, like you said, that might look quite decadent, quite horrible. It's going to be such an intense adjustment that these characters talk about to going to this new life where they have their baggage, their human baggage, basically, where they say, oh, we're still human, all too human. We're not going to be able to adjust to this. I think if we ever get to that point where we do have an unlimited consciousness and a consciousness that cannot die, our bodies will, of course, die. Maybe they won't, but at least our personalities might go on forever. How will we deal with that? And how will we avoid changing that personality so far that we do actually cease to exist anyway from that original core personality?
I think if anything, this book has seeded us with ideas about immortality that we definitely weren't getting from the first book in this series. The first book, the individual experience of possibly attaining it, that was a lucid exploration of it. But it actually didn't have anything to say about how immortal individuals would interact with in society, because they all go and live on a monastery in the middle of the desert, But this book, I think, gave me a lot to think about, and I can't wait to compare and contrast its ideas with what the authors that we are reading over the next 3 weeks have to say about immortality. Giddy up, Bob. I'll talk to you later.
We're one step closer to immortality, Zach. Talk to you later.